Welcome to the War in Heaven. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here along with Michael Hepworth, and we are today. We're going to be discussing the concept of faith. Faith is a fascinating concept in religion. It's one that has probably plagued people for a very long time. Why doesn't God show Himself to us? Why do I have to believe? Why can't I just know? And we have this very intense thirst, hunger, something to know. We want to just have it be solid. We don't want to exercise faith. And it's really interesting to look at the connection faith has to life, to our existence, to creation, agency, all these different things, and see that faith's actually a very integral part of being alive. Um, so if you take a step back for a minute and look at existence, and we can just try and break it down into our linear type of thinking. I know this doesn't fully comport to all religious teaching, but if you have your point one, point two, and you're going from one to the other. If we're traveling in the car from point to point, along this road, along this journey, is where we'd say life exists because we have the ability to choose. We have the ability to do things. And another way to look at this is kind of like birth and death. Birth starts, you start moving, you start acting, you start doing things, you're alive. But being alive necessarily means you're not to the end yet. You haven't reached that point at which you no longer have choice anymore. If you reach this point and you can't choose, you're just at your destination, or you're dead, then life stops. But what this means, if you think about it along this road, this path from birth to death, is that you have, so long as you have the ability to still choose something you haven't chosen yet, or experience something you haven't experienced yet, if there's a tomorrow, if there's a future, if there's some type of occurrence that can still come into your life, then you're alive. Once things can no longer come into your life, once they no longer are there to act on you, shape you, any of those things, you'd be dead. The reason that we mention this, and you think about, again, this continuum, you're alive during this time, is one, we believe from a spiritual perspective that there is no beginning and no end. This means inherently that you're alive because there's not going to be a point at which you can't make decisions anymore. Now, there will be a point at which you can't make certain decisions for sure, but eternal life entails there's always another set of choices, another set of experiences, something to make or do. But again, going back to this place, if you think for purposes of this example, from birth to death, from point A to point B, we have this ability during this drive or this journey to make decisions. We can drive different ways. We can take longer. We can turn around and try not to go to our destination at all. And again, we know that death will come no matter what. That's waiting for all of us. But we get to make choices during this time. And again, that entails I haven't reached that point of death yet. I haven't reached the end because I still have the ability to make a decision that I haven't made yet in this journey. The connection with that in faith is that if you are alive, it means, and there's different ways to say this, and again, they don't all break down perfectly because of terminology here versus religious terminology for eternity can be very different. But if you are alive, it means there's still a future, or there's still events that you still get to pick. There's a tomorrow, for the way we'd phrase it here on this earth. The sun's going to rise, you'll be here tomorrow. It means you're alive when there's a tomorrow still. So long as you're alive, there will be a tomorrow or something that hasn't come into your existence yet, which means you are journeying. You're pursuing a path. And if you're doing that, you have to pick where you want to go. This is where faith comes in. Faith is the act of selecting where you're headed. Because if you have the option, if there's a tomorrow, if the sun comes up again tomorrow, then you have to decide, what do I do? What do I do with tomorrow? Am I going to go work on my car? Am I going to sit down and relax? Am I going to weed my yard? All these things will then, each choice will impact what comes into our existence later, good or bad. I'm not saying it will completely define it, because there's other forces at work besides just our own choices. But for example, if I choose not to weed, then next week the weeds will be bigger. There'll be more of them. That'll be a natural result of me making that decision. But faith is me looking at something and saying, what do I want? What am I going to pursue? And faith, one way to define faith is to say it's our ability to choose our path. It's our ability to shape where we're headed. And why don't we see it yet? Because we haven't arrived there yet. We're on a journey. We haven't arrived there. And we exercise faith in our religious beliefs because we are pursuing a path to God. God exists. If we want to be like him, we want to become like him, then we're on a path there. We don't ever get mad at the city of Athens, Greece, and say, why doesn't Athens just come show itself to me? We're happy just going on the journey and getting there. But we get upset at God by saying, well, why don't you just come show yourself to me? And again, I know it goes deeper than Athens and there's some differences, but I think it's also helpful to realize our life is an experience, it's a journey, and faith is a critical aspect of us intentionally choosing which path we're pursuing. Where are we headed? What are we seeking in our life? And so at a base level, faith is a choice in where we're headed. And we can head somewhere because we still have existence left. We haven't reached the end when all things stop. And again, we don't believe that end exists. And then in addition to this, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but faith is also a principle of creation, because the fact that there's a tomorrow and the fact that I have the power to actually shape and do and speak and act means I'm influencing all those around me on the paths they're on. And when I'm influencing other people on their paths because I interact with them, then I'm shaping things, I'm creating things. And so faith becomes this incredible source of power if we look at it that way and understand it, and understand the fact that life and faith are inseparable. They go together. And we get to choose what we do. And faith is a principle to me of looking to, with an eye of faith, they call it. You look to the future, you look and say, what do I want? What am I going to shape? What am I going to do? What am I going to pursue? And it's a source of intentional living. But yeah, I don't know for sure what will or won't come, but I know what I'm pursuing. And that, to me, is a journey of faith. And it's one that we hope everyone will choose to intentionally go on, because it's a very fulfilling way to live life. But Michael, wanted to circle back before I go on too much, certainly get your thoughts on faith, life, any of these concepts we talk about, and any other aspects you may see of faith that I didn't address yet.
Yeah, I first want to mention that in saying that when we have faith, we have a choice. When we have life, we have a choice. That's not to say that you can choose anything you want. We use the word choice in many different ways. Sometimes we talk about liberty and we talk about being able to choose, and we think of a political institution. We talk about, does it allow liberty? Is it tyrannical? What is the case there? In choice, it's more a discussion of what's happening to begin with inside of your own head. To go back to the oft-used phrase, "I think, therefore I am." And to quote others, I think it was Corey ten Boom who said that happiness, if we're going to talk about a state of being happy, happiness doesn't depend on what happens outside of you. It depends on what happens inside of you. It's measured by the spirit with which you meet the problems of life. So at the very beginning, we're talking choice of, I am the master of my own mental capacities. And so I can think and desire and want and all that kind of stuff that happens inside of me, even if somebody has locked me down physically, all of that still goes on in my head. And we still have choices about how we think, how we think about other people, how we think about other experiences. So that's just at the very core when we talk about choice. We are individuals and we have that capacity to look outside of ourselves and to think about and understand the world around us. So that's kind of the beginning of choice. And generally in life, that ability lends itself towards, as you talked about, creation. We look around and we say, I don't like the world the way it is. I would prefer indoor plumbing for my house instead of having to go to an outhouse. And somebody figured that out and said, hey, it's better if we could just put that all inside. And they figured out a way to make that happen. And they had some faith in an outcome, some belief that it would, if they put in some effort, that it would work. And so it starts with what happens inside of us. We have a belief, we have a faith, we have a desire to see a difference, and then we do something about it if the faith is strong enough. If we don't have enough of a belief in the outcome, then that lends us to not creating. That's the lack of faith. We don't create, things aren't made better. And so in the discussion of choice and faith, it's not to say that you have ultimate choice over everything. You're bound by laws of the world you live in, physics, things like that. You're limited by maybe your status in the world. Different things limit you, but you always have that ability to begin something, think about something, want something, and then choose what to do about it. Maybe you just want to love those around you more, and then you have a choice to make about that and how you treat them. And that is part of creation. Having that faith that you can do something and then putting in the effort to go do it, to work, to speak, whatever it takes. That's part of life. There's always that, as Austin, you mentioned, there's always that thing that you can see in the future that you believe in. We call it a future that isn't right now. It's potential. Maybe that's another way to put it. Is there's a potential for something outside of what you see and experience and hear right now, and if you have enough faith in that potential, then you tend to go and do something about it.
Yeah, and I love the concept of thinking about it as a potential. And this is a fascinating thing, because if you compare it to the other side, which is looking to the past to inform our decisions. So for example, I'll meet people that say, I'm not going to get married. Had a couple relationships that didn't go well. I don't want to go through that again. Now, I have deep respect for the fact that it can be painful to be in a relationship. It can be painful to have a relationship broken off, those types of things. But when we then say, so I'm not going to do it again, what's happening is fear is saying, don't do it, because you might get the same result. And the interesting thing about fear is there's some truth to fear. You might get the same result. It may happen where a relationship doesn't work out or something like that takes place. It may cause pain again. And fear's purpose is to prevent us from hurting ourselves. So if there's a snake, fear kicks in and says, Austin, don't touch the rattlesnake. It's warning you about some potential harm or danger. But progression comes when we can be intentional and say, well, in spite of the fact that it hurts to have a broken relationship, I still want a relationship. I still want that potential in my life. So what do I need to do? And fear again will scream at us, don't do it. But faith will say, well, let's go try again. Let's shape, let's create, let's do. And that process doesn't mean that we've created a product that you can hand to someone. Sometimes it's just, and like you said, we created bonds of love, or there's so many intangible things that can be created. You can create thoughts in people based on what you do. And these thoughts can be good or bad that you're sticking into people's minds. And now certainly people get to choose how they respond to those thoughts, but I honestly don't choose every thought that comes into my mind. People will say something, wear something, do different things, that then there's a thought, and I have to decide what to do with it. But the point is that we are, as a living being, we are now something that people have to interact with. We're shaping people just by the fact we're alive. And that's a fascinating place to be and something to think about. And all these paths, if you're going from point A to point B and you have all these paths of people crisscrossing, doing different things, people, even if I just stand there and don't do anything, people then have to go around me. And this is something where I think people really underestimate the fact that as an individual, we shape the world around us just by being alive. Our existence shapes, because the things we say shape people's thoughts. They shape what goes into people's minds and hearts. The things we believe and pursue starts to shape people as well. And it's fascinating. We often celebrate the people who believed. The Wright brothers, for example, they flew. They went against centuries, millennia of people not flying, and flew. They believed. Something pushed them to work, to change, to do, to be. And there's this notion where if we just believe but we never do anything about it, in James, the book of James in the Bible, it says faith without works is dead. So belief alone, if we don't do anything, is dead. But we are tasked with exercising faith in this existence. And I fully believe that one reason God doesn't come just reveal himself to us, because he could travel here, he could show himself, is because the thing we're trying to learn is to become like him. And one of the fascinating things about the war in heaven, if you look at the war in heaven, we actually lived with God. We were there with him. And we could interact with him, see him, whatever, however that looked, I don't know exactly. But at some point he calls this great council in heaven. And he says to us, I want to give you the opportunity to become like me. What did it require to become like him? It required coming to this earth, living in a state and a condition where we couldn't see and understand everything, and we couldn't see God. So we say, why doesn't God show himself to us? We say, well, we lived with him for billions of years, or however long that took, eternity, whatever that looks like. But the next stage in our progression was to actually live in a state where we couldn't see him. That was the purpose of it. So if God just came and revealed himself to every one of us and said, yep, I'm here, there'd be no point to this existence. It'd be just like living with him in the premortal life. And we come here because what we're trying to do is become like him. What he did is he took whatever, there's many ways to say this, chaos, disorder, elements in their scattered state, whatever, however you want to look at it. He spoke, he acted, he created, and he formed earth, suns, planets, different things. He took that which was disorganized and organized it. And he didn't have this, he didn't just have this, he wasn't at this place where the things just were. He was shaping them, he was creating them, he was doing it as he was going along. And he encountered opposition along the way too. Satan says, I don't like it. And there was a war. There was a war in heaven. Satan and his angels fought against God and his angels. And so God dealt with agency. God dealt with people that tried to destroy, people that tried to subvert, people that were working against what he was building and creating and shaping and doing. And he still prevailed. And so then when God says to us, do you want to be like me? It was, well, let's send you to a place where you can go shape, create, act, take some disorder and bring some order to it. Use your words, use your actions. And ultimately, if you're not willing to live by faith, how can you become like God? Because again, God's the shaper, he's the creator. Why do we call him the creator of the whole universe, King of Kings? It's because we know that he took all these things and made order, brought law into effect, did these different pieces. And we get to do the same things here. We get to, in our own limited ways, pass laws. We get to try to bring order, try to bring a sense of purpose, try and bring happiness, try and help people. We get to work and shape something. We get to try and become. And that requires that God's not just here telling us what to do, how to do it. It requires we use faith.
And Jordan Peterson made an interesting comment about that. He said, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? It means to be someone who wrestles with potential, is the way he put it. And we're taught that we're made in the image of God, and that here we have opportunities given to us. We have agency, we can choose. And so our purpose here is that wrestle with potential, meaning what can we become? What can we create? What can we do? And that's part and parcel of being alive, as you talked about. There is something that is not now, something in the future. And if we believe strongly enough in that thing, then we start to wrestle with that potential. We try to make that outcome happen. You talked about fear, and George MacDonald in his book, The Prince and Curdie, this is The Princess and Curdie. He says that the truth fear tells is not much better than her lies, which is a really interesting statement. You talked about how fear tells a lot of truth, and it really does. There's a lot of truth in fear, which is one reason that we act on it. It brings a lot of caution. But his point to the truth fear tells is not much better than her lies. If you just listen to some of the truths that you see or hear from fear, then it prevents that acting in faith, and you don't move forward, and nothing is ever created. And at that point, what's the purpose of the potential if you never act on it? And so, despite fear telling us sometimes to not act, to not speak, to hold back, sometimes we need to listen to the truth of potential, that we can actually make something bigger and better. And you'll probably discuss more about this, but we see this a lot in this country when we just talk about voting. People tend to vote based on a fear of what would happen if the other side wins. And so they try to mitigate disaster, vote for the lesser of two evils. We're just afraid that if we don't vote with a crowd that we kind of sort of agree with, then the other crowd that we disagree or we agree with less may get their individual into office. But we never vote off of faith or confidence for the most part. We don't say, I believe in this person. I may be the only one, but I believe in them. And so I will vote off of faith that I can make a difference, that something I do, me standing up, is going to change something. Too often we listen to the truth of fear, which is things might go wrong. And, sometimes things go wrong, but we don't pay enough attention to, yes, but things could go right as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the lies, is fear will never tell you what could go right or what might work, or even that the pain or the sacrifice is worth it. Again, fear can go, hey, if you start a business, you could lose your house. Yeah, you might, but you might also gain a far better home. And this is something I've realized, where fear, it's pretty incredible, because I remember there was a couple times, when I was a little tiny kid, 4 years old probably, I don't remember the exact age. I was out running outside without my shoes on. Stepped on a bee, stung me, hurt a lot. As a kid, it was traumatic. I cried, whatever. But the fascinating thing was about fear, if you look at fear this way, fear then made me afraid to go outside without my shoes on again. So my fear said, well, be safe. I'm going to teach you how not to hurt yourself again, so put on shoes. And it was interesting how strongly embedded that stayed in me. I just put on my shoes whenever I was outside, and I thought people were crazy that went outside without their shoes on. Well, when I get married, and this is one of the fascinating things about marriage and relationships, is that you start to learn things about yourself that you didn't realize were there. I had 2 daughters at the time, and they wanted to run outside. And I remember telling them, I said, you got to put your shoes on to go outside. And my wife said, why? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. And I said, you have to have your shoes on. Can't go outside without shoes on. She said, why? I said, because you might get stung by a bee. She said, that's the craziest thing, Austin. She says, I've gone outside for years without my shoes on and never been stung by a bee. And so we literally went back and forth on this for a little while till I finally said, fine, let them run outside without their shoes on. And my fear had been telling me not to because they might step on a bee. And the most amazing thing is that they ran outside, and within 10 seconds, they were back inside crying. They had run out the exact same spot, following each other's footsteps. One stepped on a wasp, it stung her, and then the other one stepped onto the wasp again right after, and it stung her. And both came crying in with a wasp sting in their foot. And I remember going, hey, see, you go out there without shoes on, you get stung. And my wife was going, I don't believe this. I've done this for my whole life, never had an issue. But the thing that, again, that I learned from it was that, again, my fear was telling me a truth. You could step on a wasp. But what happened was that my 2 girls, we put a little ice on their feet. I remember some other ointment or something. Within 5 minutes, they were back outside again without their shoes on. For whatever reason, their fear didn't make them terrified to go outside again without shoes like it did for me. And I looked at that, and they processed the pain and moved on. And I went, wow, that's fascinating. Because yes, there was pain, but to them, the experience of being outside without the shoes on, being free, not constrained by shoes and socks, was worth the potential of stepping on a wasp. And they did it again. And I look at that and I think, wow, that's really interesting. Is my fear, are most of my fears related to something that may end my life? Or is it just cause some unpleasantness for a moment? And if it's unpleasantness for a moment, then what's the potential outcome? Why don't I look at the potential outcome of what could be and let my faith be stronger than my fear? Because even if the situation happens where it's like, if I try this shot, I might look stupid. They might, but that feeling of looking stupid comes and goes. You're still alive. There's still something to experience. But what happens if you try and make it? And what happens if you don't go outside without your shoes on and have that more earth-based connection? There's people that talk about health benefits from that and different things. And so the thing that I look at with faith is to say, it's fascinating that our fear can be so powerful and strong. Go to our past experiences and say, well, we can't do that. And I go, yeah, we could have had a weird outlier like stepping on a bee. I would guess that most people in the world haven't stepped on a bee and been stung on the bottom of their foot. But that fear still controlled my life instead of the faith of just most places outside don't have bees on the ground and I can go outside without shoes on. And it's a simple example, but it goes to relationships. Well, I was nice to someone once and they were mean. Okay. I believe it. Probably hurt, probably wasn't pleasant. You probably felt used, abused, whatever. But why can't you be nice again? Because it could change someone's life. Um, and again, in this process of living and being in a realm where more than one being is living, we are all shaping each other. And yes, I can't say, for example, that, well, I for sure am going to build a spaceship and get to Mars. Elon Musk has those plans. That's awesome. He's got a little bit more resources than I do. Maybe I could find people willing to fund it if I really set to it. Sometimes the things we set for and pursue don't materialize in this life between these 2 points. But almost always the things that we set forth and do as we talk, as we work, as we strive for it, it inspires others, it plants thoughts, it shapes them. And we have to realize we're not alone in this not a vacuum that we exist in just by ourselves. The things we do and pursue, even if they don't materialize in our short duration on this earth, are shaping existence, shaping things around us. And that goes whether we're pursuing something or not, or just along for the ride with the current of society. But faith is the principle that says, let me take a step back. Is my life headed where I want it to, or am I going to start to work to do something different? Am I going to pursue something? What am I pursuing? Do I want this to be, or do I not want it to be? And I remember specifically coming to a point where this was in, again, I am deeply religious, but I reached a place where I was very dark inside. And not that I was evil, but I couldn't feel light. It just felt very dark all the time. And I remember thinking, why would it be so dark in here? Why can't I feel light? Why can't I sense God? And experiences like that, I think, cause people to start questioning when there's pain, when there's darkness. And it was there a long time, over the course of quite a significant amount of time. And it got me to the point where I was feeling somewhat without hope or faith, going, well, maybe there isn't a God. And as I started thinking about that, I eventually reached a point where I said, well, what if I abandoned this religious path and did something else? The question instantly in my mind was, what would you be pursuing? Where would you go? What then do you live for? And I remember going through all the options I could come up with in my mind. And at the end of the day, the only one that had any type of lasting fulfillment for me anyways was to go, I have to pursue an existence where God lives. Because without a God, without this being that we're trying to become like, without progression, without life after this, meaning is erased. And now I know that people come to different conclusions and different things. There's some deeply personal journeys in that. But I believe very strongly that if we're honest with ourselves and fully look to the future to say, what actually am I headed towards? What path am I pursuing? And can it be built or not? This goes back to another one of our podcasts where we talked about there are some things we pursue that simply will never be. And so living a life of faith is I can go try and create, for example, I can say, I want the sun to not be hot, but still light our world. Well, just based on the laws of physics, the sun has to be hot to light our world. And there are things that I can push for and work for that could be something that will never be. And this is where people get, again, where fear kicks in. Fatalism as a term, as a principle, as a thing that people adopt, says you ultimately can't change anything. It's just all set. But I go back to the place of saying, if it's all set, then we're no longer alive. In fact, we're alive. Existing today means it's not set. And now maybe I can't change everything. Maybe in my time I can help free North Korea. Maybe I can't. I don't know. But can I pick something, work and create, shape and do, and work to be with that? And then let my words, actions, inspire others, influence others, and trust that in this grand scheme of things and the billions of people that exist, my words can have impact. They can do something. Michael, do you have thoughts or things to add to any of that?
I like how you asked the question, what are you pursuing? I think it's a helpful question to ask to understand what you're trying to do. Do you have a purpose? Are you trying to create something? What's your ultimate goal? And that will help you understand how or in what ways you have potential, what ways you can create. And while the ultimate thing we're trying to create or do is important and it can be realized at times, depending on what we decide to work on or how long we work on it. I think the more important side of it is the fact that we are working on something. Gordon B. Hinckley once said that we should have faith in the outcome of the good things that we do. And even if we try to do some great and grandiose thing that we don't realize in our lifetime, the importance was the beginning of the work, the change that it made in our lives to pursue it, the change it made in the lives of those who saw us pursuing it, maybe left a legacy to someone else that could fulfill what we tried to fulfill, or generations later. Whatever the case is, the journey, the trying, the wrestling with the potential is the important thing that happens. Us trying to create something. Along the way, we create so many other things, even if we never realize that final thing that we were working towards. We become new and improved and better. We can help those around us. So the journey is really kind of the really important aspect of this whole thing. And we should be asking ourselves, what are we pursuing? What are we trying to accomplish? Even if it's not something we will realize, even if we work towards it, we have to have the faith that we're going to change something, that we're going to create something. Otherwise, yeah, there's no existence. If we can't change anything, we can't create anything. There's no existence. We are just being carried along, or as Dostoevsky put it, we're just an organ stop. We get pushed and pulled by the whims of nature. But the fact that we can desire and want and build and choose indicates that there's a potential, there's a future, and there's something that we can build towards if we have the faith to pursue it.
Yeah, and I think the question of, if a child were to ask and say, hey, what does next year hold for me? The answer is, depends on what you pursue. It depends on what you build. It depends on what you do. And that's the same for all of us. And it's fascinating to me when we look at problems in society and we feel they're too big to solve. You go, well, if it's too big to solve, then what created it? Because if a human could create the problem, a human can create the solution too. And these are things that that I believe very strongly in. There's not this just irreversible thing that gets set in motion. It's like, shoot, what are we gonna do? There's no chance. It's set. It's that there's always something. And again, it's not to say that every attempt will actually change the thing. Some things will still occur. But every attempt will shape, will do, and will create. And the amazing thing about our existence and the fact that we're spirits is that our existence isn't limited to this point between birth and death. It's been there a long time. And the war in heaven is fundamentally over this fact that this uncertainty, this factor, this futures factor of, well, Satan and his followers said, well, can you guarantee it? Can you make sure that I get there? God says, well, I give you the path. I can for sure tell you there'll be a planet. There'll be the options. There'll be the different things that you need. But your future is what you do with it. And that terrifies some people when they hide and they don't accept responsibility. But it should really embolden us to say, wow, my future's not set. And I'm going to go try and do something. And again, we have to be able to live with the fact that something will happen. It may not be exactly what we want, but I'm going to work. And that brings so much life to our existence. And when I look at and this is actually just something to kind of a little tangent to go off on, but when I look at the levels of depression, anxiety, and mental health issues, we're the richest country in the world that's ever existed in all of our knowledge of the history. We have everything you could imagine. And we're crazy depressed. I believe very strongly that the reason we're so crazy depressed and anxious is because we're stopped living. We're not pursuing the real meaning of life, which is to work, to create, to shape, to build, to be part of something, to be solving problems. Instead, we sit and be entertained. We're just along for a ride in the current. And if you think about being in a current that's sweeping along quickly and you have no idea where it's going, that'll probably produce some anxiety, probably make you sad, scared. But if you say, no, I know what I'm doing with my life. I've got a plan, I've got a purpose, and I'm working, I believe very strongly that's the antidote to so much of the mental health issues we face. But because we're so rich as a nation, we don't have to work, we don't have to pursue. We can just be along for the ride, and someone else will say, oh, give me your money, I'll entertain you. Give me your money, I'll go do that for you. Call a plumber, don't do it yourself. But when we don't do it ourselves, when we don't do the work, we don't experience fulfillment. We don't experience the purpose of faith, of creation, of these different things. And if we want to break out of our funk and we want to find fulfillment in life, we have to work. We have to live by faith. That's where it comes, is to say, yep, there's a future and I tackled it. I did something. Look at this. That's what brings fulfillment to the present, is addressing our future and tackling it, instead of just being along for the ride of whatever society or the others are producing for us. And I saw this. I have a son, he's almost 8, and his older brother mows the lawn. We have a big lawn. It takes a good 3 or so hours to mow. And he begged me over and over again, Dad, can I mow the lawn? Can I mow the lawn? Can I mow the lawn? And he struggled some he's had some angry bouts and different things as he's been growing up. And finally, his older brother was away at a camp. And I said, all right, I'm going to let you try and mow the lawn this week. And he went outside and he pulled on the mower many times as he could, just over and over and over again. And I went out to help him and encouraged him some. And I showed him a couple tricks to starting it. He finally gets it started on his own with his own strength of pulling it. He was so happy. And then he started mowing the lawn. And I went back out 2 hours or so after he started. He's covered in sweat, breathing hard. And I said, hey, go inside for a drink. And he goes, no, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to do it. But I still made him go inside, take a break for a minute. But he was so happy. And the work he did and the things he struggled to achieve brought him intense happiness. And that day he radiated joy because he worked and he overcame something. He had a purpose and he pursued it. And so this notion of faith without works is dead. If our actions in life aren't taking us towards anything meaningful, we'll feel dead inside. We won't feel life. We won't feel alive. We won't feel happy. We won't feel fulfillment. Watching movie after movie isn't what fulfills us. It's the act of creation, which is an act of work, of shaping, of doing, of being, that brings that happiness and fulfillment. Michael, before we wrap up, any final thoughts or things you want to talk about?
No, just to reemphasize, we started off talking about the importance of faith, and to say just the faith isn't going to be good enough. It's the faith and the work. But too often we don't put in the work because we don't have the faith. We don't believe the outcome. If you're a young child who's 8 years old, you don't believe or desire to mow the lawn. And so there's no faith there, but the faith drives you to the work, which then drives you to the fulfillment. And so faith is that leading factor. We need faith in our lives. It's not discussed enough in the world today. Even if you want to discuss it outside of a religious context, you have to have faith in whatever you're working on is going to do something. And we need to talk about faith more to encourage more people to give things a try to find fulfillment in their lives via creation, via work, finding meaning that way.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we hope you had some thoughts today. Our invitation to you is to really think about your life. Where's it headed? What are you intentionally pursuing? And to realize that if you start doing the work to intentionally pursue something and create something, you'll be far happier and far more fulfilled. You should live by faith. And so let's make faith a big portion of our existence. Faith looks to the future, fear looks to the past. And let's be future looking people to say, what do I want tomorrow, next year? And then work to achieve that. So thanks for joining us today. And we look forward to talking with you more next week.